Our first speaker is the author of Content Strategy for Mobile and managing partner at Bond Art and Science, a user experience consultancy she founded in 2006. She consults with businesses on how to get their content ready for mobile, and she teaches students about design management at the School of Visual Arts. Please welcome Karen McGrane.
You guys know what's awesome? Print. Print was amazing because you put the words on the paper and then they stay there. You don't have to worry about keeping it updated all the time. If they want you to make a new version of it, they give you like a year to work on it. Print is fantastic. And so the fact that print is so deeply embedded in the history of human communication, all of the techniques that we have to communicate meaning, priority, weight, aesthetics, values, those are all really deeply rooted in the way that we think about the print production process. And then we had to go and invent the web, which, I mean, on balance, I think we can all admit has been totally worth it, but man, is it a pain in the ass. Constantly having to keep things updated, nonstop changes. It's really hard to know what to do with the web. So I am a huge nerd for computer history. Like anybody who knows me knows that you can get me talking endlessly about the history of technology and kind of how we wound up here today over the last 50 to 70 years. And the web this year just turned 25 years old. And if you kind of take a step back from the kind of stuff that we do every day, the day-to-day business of keeping a website running, and just sort of like appreciate what the web means, like the very foundations of that technology, HTML, hypertext markup language, and the URL, the Uniform Resource Locator, those technologies were designed from the start with the explicit intent that anyone, anywhere, could easily create a document that could be updated instantly and accessible globally. And when you really stop to think for a minute about just how transformational that is in the history of human communication, just how different that is from anything that has come before in the history of print, 25 years isn't nearly enough time for us to have fully understood the way that the web is different. And so instead, we've spent the last 25 years sort of with training wheels on, allowing people to pretend that the web is a web page is just basically like a print document, is it? I mean, it's sort of like a piece of paper. But now, with the rise of mobile devices, we are forced to confront, once and for all, the way that the web is different, the way that the web has always been different, which is that we no longer have control over what screen size someone has, what input mechanism they're using, what device type they have, what resolution or bandwidth they have. That shared hallucination that we have all been operating under, that we have control of the user's format, it's gone. And so with the rise of mobile, and of course now with tablet devices, we don't have the luxury of making these assumptions anymore. And so to me, this is the real transformation of mobile. When I talk about content strategy for mobile, I don't mean figuring out what you want to put on a mobile device. I mean acknowledging that the true transformation that we are all wrestling with here is how do we communicate when we have no idea what the format is going to be. And this transformation, this is just getting started. I mean, this isn't going to stop. Maybe, I want to say, I am not a futurist. I am not here to predict for you what the next big wave of technology is that's going to capture the public's imagination. But I'm going to tell you one thing. It's going to happen. if the history of what we've seen happen even in the last 5 years, our hunger for new devices and new technologies that will allow us to connect and get on the internet, that's not going to stop. Maybe the next thing will be smart TV. There's a lot of rumors, expectations that the next big battle in technology is going to be for the living room. And so looking at this sort of form factor, I think, to me, really drives home the fallacy of making any assumptions whatsoever about what type of screen somebody has or what input mechanism they're using to interact with it, even how far away they might be from the communication. And in that, I think it really, in my mind, drives home the point of how difficult it is for us to rely on this outdated notion of a page, or that the screen can be thought of as a page, and that the transformations that we might do between the smallest smartphone interface and the largest smart TV interface can all be taken care of on the front end. It's like, I'm not saying that we can't do this all with responsive design, but the challenge there is saying, these form factors are so different. The input mechanisms are so different. The needs of the users are so different. How do we do that? And so beyond smart TV, we're going to see technology, emerging in ever new places, like in-car systems. I'm driving around in a car here. Dean's driving around in this BMW that's got this futuristic spaceship screen in it. And when you think about what's going to happen when these sorts of in-car systems become a reality, I know it's kind of terrifying to me to think of somebody browsing the internet on a screen in their car, but what happens when that intersection isn't just a screen in the car, but it's also an audio system? And that there's interplay between what someone can do through voice and what someone can do through touchscreen applications. And that, to me, those combination of input factors and different ways of communicating, that stuff, that seems to me to be the big transformation. You might very reasonably say, Karen, so what you're predicting here is like the Star Trek computer. Do you really think that's going to happen? You know what didn't work for a really long time? Touchscreens. Touchscreens were terrible. You remember going to the ATM and having to angle your finger at just the right way to get the button to push, and they sucked. For easily decades, touchscreens were sort of thought of as this also-ran technology that was just never going to be quite ready for prime time. And then one day, touchscreens worked. They worked perfectly. And it transformed our entire industry in the space of 5 years. So you might look at audio interfaces today and think, that's never going to happen. But I don't know when it'll be, 5 years, 15 years, 50 years. Someday that is going to happen. And when it does, it's going to transform human society. And when we get there, when I get to use the Star Trek computer for real, the last thing that I want is for it to start reading out, open bracket // colon. I don't want that kind of code integrated into my content. And when you think about something as tiny, as minuscule, as the single letter tag for italics, think about that. I've had developers come to me and say, Karen, why should I even bother trying to parse out the difference between what's supposed to be italics and what's supposed to be emphasis when every major browser since the dawn of time has rendered emphasis as italics? Not in an audio interface, they don't. One of those things conveys style, conveys visual styling. One of those things conveys semantic meaning. And they are not the same. And if we have that problem at the tiniest little tag, think about how much else we have in our content, where we are conveying the meaning of that content solely through visual cues, through cues that will not translate in another form of an interface. You may not believe that this is coming, but if you're curious, just go spend 5 minutes looking up what Google is doing with what they call their conversation group. Google is a company that can make cars that drive themselves. And that's not even their full-time business, that's just their weird side project. But figuring out how human beings interact with machines through language, that is what Google does best. And I'm pretty sure that someday this is going to become a reality. So Given that, given my enthusiasm here, maybe the next big thing is going to be Google Glass. I don't really think Google Glass is going to be the next big thing. I think Google Glass is like the Segway of mobile. But the idea that there will be a whole new wave of crazy new form factors, wearable technology, screens that don't actually match with whatever our concept of a screen should be, that's going to be real. Like, this is going to happen. And so Google, not that long ago, released their UI specs for what you should do if you want your content to render appropriately in Google Glass's format. What do you do if all of your content is architected and designed so that it looks great on your website? How do you go in and strip out all of that content and then reformat it so that it works great on Google Glass? I'm not for a moment suggesting that you should do this, but what happens when the next technology comes around where you do want to do that? What do you have to be thinking about right now to make it possible for you to get there? I don't know, maybe the next big thing is going to be watches, right? Like, Samsung's already released their watch. There's a watch called the Pebble right now that's like this 8-bit black and white thing that's actually very popular. This is not a real watch, it's an artist rendering of what an Apple Watch might look like, but there's a sense that this is, this kind of like wearable form factor is probably the next thing that people are going to explore. And people might reasonably say, well, God, like, why would I want a watch? Why do I want a tiny little screen on which, you'd think I'm going to read a long document on my wrist? Is that the plan? Probably not. But when you think about a watch as part of an ecosystem of devices, as a controller that might allow you to talk to your smart TV, or a notifications that would communicate with your smartphone, the idea that that watch might be something that could connect to an audio interface and give you sort of touchscreen ability for things that you're also listening to. When you realize that this is part of a bigger ecosystem, it makes it clear that, oh, right, our content will have to live in a variety of different formats. And even if somebody doesn't want to actually physically read that content there, they may need to act on it, or they may need some format, some way of engaging with that content, even if it's not a reading experience. It could be a listening experience. And so thinking about that ecosystem says, oh, right, we're going to have to think about different formats and structures for our content, because it's going to live in a bunch of different places. The watches, so tiny, I don't know, maybe they're not the next big thing. Maybe the next big thing is stadium scoreboards. Let's get our content where everybody can see it, guys, right? This is a joke. I put this in here as a joke. I thought it was funny because the watches are so small and the scoreboards are so big. And then I turned around and I talked to a client who said that their biggest problem right now is digital signage. So I'm working with a university. And they said, Karen, here's what we have. We have a website, we have a mobile app, and then we just bought these digital signs that we want to put up all over campus. And we need a way that we can manage and maintain our content all in one place and have them automatically published to all 3 platforms. And I was like, have you thought about treating the digital signs as if they're a completely separate silo and just managing their workflow completely independently? And they were like, Karen, ain't nobody got time for that. The whole reason we're talking to you is we want a way to manage and maintain one set of content and have it dynamically populate 3 very different platforms automatically. This isn't some crazy futuristic dystopia that these people are living in. This is a problem that they have right now. So if universities and other platforms are trying to figure out how do they use signage as sort of a broadcast mechanism for digital technology, maybe you'll want to do the same thing at home on your refrigerator, right? It's like we can't talk about the future without talking about the internet fridge, right? It's like the biggest problem facing society today is that I can't check Twitter in the 30 seconds that it takes me to get a Diet Coke. I don't know that the internet refrigerator is ever going to be prime time, but the idea that you will have digital technology, screens or sensors embedded into your home that will talk to other devices. Maybe your cooktop one day will be a giant iPad screen, and you'll be able to interact with recipes and videos right there on the cooktop. Or, and I think this is the biggest problem facing us today, what happens when toaster printers become a reality? Is your content going to be ready to be burned onto delicious toast? these are the problems that we're here to solve today, together. So right now, you are already wrestling with the problems of how do you get your content onto a wide variety of different platforms and form factors. You have a website, you're maybe considering mobile apps, you have an intranet, you have to get your content onto blogs or an email, you may even have print infrastructure, you have microsites that you're maintaining. And tomorrow, there's going to be ever more platforms to get our content onto. And the thing is, I don't care if you believe that any one of these platforms is going to be the next big thing. It doesn't matter to me. Because what does matter is that there will be a next big thing. And whenever it happens, our content has to be ready to go there. And so this to me is the big transformation that we are wrestling with. It is the challenge that we have in figuring out how do we protect ourselves against this veritable zombie apocalypse of new devices and platforms and screen sizes and resolutions and input mechanisms, and they just keep coming day after day. How do we battle these zombies? Well, we battle these zombies by striking a stake deep into the heart of what makes the web different from print, and that is the true separation of content from form. That in this environment, we no longer have the luxury of assuming that we can couple the message that we want to communicate with the stylistic meaning implied by one particular layout or form factor, that we can tightly couple what it is we want to say with a design that is intended for one particular device. Do you understand how transformational this is in the history of human communication? I mean, think about this monk laboriously hand-copying documents, scribing information to be preserved for centuries. The idea that up until this point, that you could separate content from presentation, the idea that this monk would ever have to think about the idea of what is the message contained in this document, separate from the particular style and layout and juxtaposition of images and prose that he's creating. It wouldn't make any sense. Human communication never worked that way. Except now it does. And so we simply don't have the luxury of making assumptions about how the semantic cues that we have as to priority or weight or hierarchy or relationships between ideas. We simply can't rely solely on visual cues anymore to communicate that. We have to come up with new ways of embedding that information into our content so that it can make the leap to other platforms. And so this I think, this is the challenge. And when I talk about this stuff, especially when I talk to web people, it's really easy to fall into the trap of thinking that what I mean when I say separate content from form is that I'm talking about HTML. That I'm talking about, get your HTML out of my content, get your chocolate out of my peanut butter. When Dan Jacobson, who's from Netflix, he's also the API guy from NPR, who Dean Barker is going to be talking about next, when he says that the future of content management systems is in their ability to capture the content in a clean, presentation-independent way. It's really tempting to think that what he means is that we've got to clean up the markup that's embedded in our systems. And that's part of it, but it's really only the tip of the iceberg. Today, oftentimes, content creators get editing interfaces that allow them or encourage them to imagine that what they are doing is just like Microsoft Word. Now, this one here, it's OpenText Live for Vignette, says the Word-like interface makes content creation easy for business users who know nothing about HTML and want to keep it that way. So these tools, the ability for a content creator to go in and using this toolbar at the top of the screen to add custom tables and fonts, to take a box like this and float it to the right, to add whatever bullets or styling information they want. It's those functionalities that we sort of group under the category of Wysiwyg editors. That's sort of the root of the problem. And I've gotten the reputation from complaining about interfaces like this as being sort of the president of the Wysiwyg Haters Club. And I just want you guys to know that while I very much enjoy getting my message out in groups and organizations like this, My graffiti crime spree is also going exceptionally well. It's going to continue unless I get the message out here. So, you know, when I say to people, like, you know, I complain about Wysiwyg, I complain about these editing interfaces that work like Word, sometimes people will come up to me and they'll be like, oh yeah, Karen, Wysiwyg, it's terrible, like Markdown is the answer. And that's not the problem for me either. I mean, the thing is, I don't care if somebody has a toolbar at the top of the screen by which they can enter formatting or styling, you know, semantic markup. What I care about is that we are allowing content authors to get by using an antiquated metaphor for what it means to create content on the web. You know, where do you think Wysiwyg came from? You know? It came from Xerox. It came from Xerox PARC. Because they invented the laser printer. Think about that for a minute. Up until this point, a Xerox machine could only create a copy of a document that you already had. Xerox figured out a way that you could print out whatever you wanted. Except they needed a way for you to actually create that document. And so Xerox innovated the entire graphical user interface and the very concept of what you see is what you get. Technologies that ushered in the wave of personal computer adoption and the wave of desktop publishing that significantly grew people's adoption of computers. Like, the reason that people started adopting personal computers and the reason that people started using these Wysiwyg interfaces is because Xerox wanted to sell laser printers. And the demand for them was so high that, frankly, all of us have jobs today. You can directly peg the growth of the web to the rise in graphical user interfaces that were directly based on these graphical user interfaces. I think we owe a great, I will freely admit that we owe a great debt to Wysiwyg and these tools that we have used for the last 30 years or so to communicate what it means to create a document. I feel like I can say I'm very grateful for this as a point in human history, but I can also turn around and tell you that the web is not a laser printer. The web shares nothing in common with a laser printer. There is nothing about creating a document, a dynamic, updated document that is accessible all over the world on the web, that is really anything like printing out a document from Microsoft Word on the printer next to your desk. And yet we continue to allow content creators to get by using this outdated mental model of what it means to create documents. Ted Nelson says that imitating paper on a computer screen is like tearing the wings off of a 747 and using it as a bus on the highway. The web is better than that. The web is different. The power that we have on the web to have things that are updated instantaneously is so much greater than what we could do in print, that in exchange, we have to accept the ways that the web is different. We have to accept that we no longer have control over presentation and formatting. And we have to embrace the fluid and flexible nature of communicating information separate from particular control over any one output format. The page is dead. Now what? See what I did there? So this is when I get to talk about my favorite subject, which is the war that we are fighting of blobs versus chunks. Blobs are the big, gloppy, formatting-rich, Microsoft Word-like, sloppy form fields in which we encourage content authors to think of a web page like it's just like a printed document, and they should embed all of their formatting and slideshows and whatever other kitchen sink crap they want to throw in that one big text blob. Versus chunks, which are clean, presentation-independent chunks of content that have been structured and intended from the start that they can and will live on any platform. Dean, when he comes next, is going to talk a little bit about some of the limitations of this, but let me give you an intro to what I mean when I say that the future is creating content in chunks. So our ability to fend off the zombies is dependent on these four characteristics. We need structured content. So it means we need content that has the right structure, the right information, the right metadata attached to it. And that means that instead of relying on visual styling, we're going to have to replace that with semantic metadata that encodes what something means rather than just what something should look like. That also means that we might have to create alternate forms of our content, what I like to call content packages, so that the same content, the same intent of the content, may be able to be referenced in different ways on different platforms. And finally, if we're going to be able to achieve all of this, we're going to have an author experience in our content management systems that actually guides content creators, that helps them do what they need to do. I'm going to talk about each one of these in turn. So let's talk about structured content first. So back in the 1980s, America had a favorite magazine, and it was the TV Guide. Don't ever tell me that Americans don't read. So TV Guide, late 1980s. TV Guide, they're the most popular magazine in America. They could totally have patted themselves on the back and been like, you know what we are? We are the best darn magazine out there. We are a fantastic magazine publisher. Let's all just go home for the day because we're so great at making magazines. But they didn't do that because they realized that they weren't actually in the magazine publishing business. They were in the content publishing business. And so what TV Guide did back in the late 1980s, long before any of the web or any of these other technologies existed, was they built themselves this green screen mainframe application that they used as sort of a proto-CMS. And they told all of their content authors that now, when they were writing program descriptions, they were going to enter them into this mainframe, and they weren't just going to write the one program description that was actually going to appear in the physical magazine. No, they told all of their authors that they were going to write 3 separate versions: a short form, a medium form, and a long form. And if you guys have ever worked with writers, I think you can imagine predictably what their response was. It was basically, why? Why? Why am I doing this? Why? You just tripled my workload. Why do I have to write 3 versions? Why? They didn't know. They had no idea where this content was going to go in the future. They didn't know that one day you were going to have a cable box that was going to dynamically present information about what shows were available to watch, that could integrate a feed of program descriptions coming from TV Guide. They didn't know that one day TiVo was going to come along and revolutionize the television industry by basically giving everybody a giant VCR that they could plug into their TV that would automatically show whatever programs were available to watch, and they could program them in advance. And they most certainly did not know that one day you were going to have this magical pocket robot, and you could pull it out, and it would talk to your television set. You could actually pull something out of your pocket and use it to go tell your cable box, okay, yeah, this show's coming up, why don't you go record it for me? And that device might want to include the program description that somebody from TV Guide wrote in the 1980s. All of this program data, this exact content, if you were to go back, if you were to look up this TV Guide app on your iPhone, and you were to go back and find an episode of Cheers or MASH that aired in the late 1980s, that program description is the exact same one that somebody wrote 30 years ago. They are still getting value out of that content today. And they're getting value for it on platforms that no one ever dreamed would exist when they came up with this strategy. And the only way that that is possible is because they treated their content as if it was data and not as if it was just content. If all of that text was locked up in Quark files, they would have no way to go back in and actually get access to those program descriptions. And more important, they would have no way in those Quark files to determine what was the genre of the program, who were the actors in the program, how long was the program, what station did that program air on. The fact that they invested in creating structured content meant that they could use that content again and again and again. They got more value out of it. And so what that means is that rather than treating the decisions about what that genre of that program was, for example, as, oh, well, that's just bold text, or the name of the program, yeah, that's all caps text. Instead, they replaced that information with semantic metadata that encoded what those things were and what they meant. I love these two quotes here. Metadata is the new art direction, and metadata is a love note to the future. So the first one, I think, suggests or makes it clear that the world that we live in, of all of these new devices and platforms and screen sizes, means that we can't possibly rely on the same techniques of having human art directors and designers lovingly handcraft every single page. And let me be clear about this. I'm not saying that designers and art directors are going away. They are as important as ever. But what I am saying is that the plain practical reality of all of the platforms and devices and screen sizes we need to get on means that we can't treat each one as if it's a piece of paper, where an art director goes in and makes handcrafted decisions about what every pixel and image and dot on that screen is going to be. Instead, we have to get the robots to help us. And the robots are going to use metadata that we have encoded in the content to make good decisions about layout and priority and hierarchy and the structure of information. And the second, metadata is a love note to the future. That, to me, says that the effort that we put in now to encoding information to cue what something should mean, that effort pays off. Much like TV Guide found, the effort that we put into saying, let's make sure that we've captured meaning separate from what it looks like, that's what gives our content value in the future. Guardian ran into this problem, and they created these things called topic pages. So these are really SEO-friendly ways that they can get the robots to go into their database and aggregate all of the articles they've ever published on a particular proper noun or known term. So they can say, hey, robots, go get me everything we've ever published on Tony Blair. And we're going to make a nice page about it so that when somebody searches Tony Blair, they can find this page. So when they mocked this up, and created this box here called Top Story. And then once they got the pages up, they realized something troubling. They had no way of knowing what a top story was. They had no editorial priority metadata in their database that encoded whether one story was more important than another. And so to solve this problem for these topic pages, they came up with a pretty common solution, which was that they made their editors do more work. They told their editors that every time a story hit the CMS, they had to manually go in and encode that story 1 to 5 to say, here's how important it is. But here's the thing. They already had a ton of editorial priority metadata about which stories were more important than another. And they were all encoded in the layout of the print edition. You can tell at a glance, you don't need to read one word on that screen to be able to pick up on cues like the size of the typography, the number of column inches, the layout of the story, the placement and the juxtaposition of images, the use of color, where that story appears on the page. All of those are semantic cues that we just sort of intuitively know. You could probably glance at a newspaper headline like this and be able to even put it in context of other stories throughout time. You could know whether this was a major story compared to other major stories that have happened. And all of that is sort of instantaneously apprehended through the visual cues that we have from design. And all of that information was lost when the Guardian tried to take what they encoded here in print and tried to take it to another platform. I'm sure somebody's entire full-time job is making decisions about the layout and hierarchy of that front page, and yet none of that meeting actually made the leap to another platform. So when it came time for the Guardian to create an iPad app, they did something different. They built an algorithm that went into their InDesign files for the print edition and read the layout to pick out cues like the size of the typography or the number of column inches or the hierarchy of the story, picked up on the same kind of cues that you would pick up on. And then they used that algorithm to drive the layout of the iPad edition. The iPad edition isn't like a replica edition of the print paper. It's its own thing. It has its own layout. It has its own visual style. But the underlying meaning of what order the stories go in, how large the sizes of blocks are, all of that is driven by the editorial priority metadata that they pulled from the print files. Now, I don't tell this story to suggest that anybody should go out and start writing robots to read their InDesign files. That's not the solution that I'm proposing here. But I like this example because I think it really drives home the point that if we rely solely on visual cues intended for one platform to communicate meaning, we will never be able to make the leap to other platforms. We have to find ways to instead encode that meaning into our content so that they are not reliant on any one particular visual style. And so that then leads to a third point, which is the idea that beyond just thinking about our content as this flexible system, we also need to be thinking about how we can create alternate forms or sizes of our content so that it'll have a chance to go other places. And I call these things content packages. So I'll give you a little bit of an example of this. When you work with publishers, I do a lot of work with the publishing industry, you realize that they've figured out this whole problem of how do you handle images on different sizes or in different contexts. So I led the redesign of the New York Times back in 2005, 2006, the last redesign. And when we did this, one of the things that we came up with is a system of a package of different sizes of images that they could use in different contexts. And we came up with 6 or 7 different sizes that their production team would cut. And then those were the sizes that they used in every possible context. And what happened was we came up with this package of image sizes long before mobile platforms ever existed. And yet they were able to make the leap onto the mobile web and tablet apps and mobile apps using this exact same system of image crops. And might I have chosen slightly different sizes for the images if I had known what future platforms they were going to have to be on? Yeah, I mean, it's possible, sure. But the idea that this combination of images was able to make the leap onto those platforms, that they had a library of different sizes that they could choose from that allowed them to get onto other platforms. The fact that it's like if you can wrap your head around that, then you can wrap your head around how that might work for other things. And I think the point to drive home here about these images is that while these are the same image, you might think of these as all being the same image. You could tell a system, okay, I need an image here of Dick Clark, so go and get me whichever one, whichever format, whichever crop size fits the appropriate real estate. In that sense, they're the same picture. But they're not identical pictures. They don't have to be the exact same image. They could be a set of different images that stand in for the whole, and any one of them can serve the purpose of having a picture of Dick Clark, even though they are not the exact same content. If that, that's a little bit elusive, but it's if you can wrap your head around that, okay, one image can stand, a variety of image can stand in for one image, and those images can make the leap to different platforms. If that makes sense for images, then hopefully it will make sense for other things, like text. So one of my biggest pet peeves on the web, one of the things that I think is just most horrible and hilarious at the same time, is the number of publications that truncate their headlines. I mean, I just kind of want to shake them. Daily Beast here. Do you know what your business model is? Do you know what the entire point of having this page is? I'll tell you what the point is. The entire point of this page and your business is that someone will read a headline, decide that the story is interesting to them, tap on that headline, and go read the story. That's it. That's your whole business. And yet, Daily Beast was well, we can't possibly allocate enough real estate so that someone can read the entire headline here. I mean, that's lunacy. I mean, how could we do that and have a giant glob of white space in the middle of the page? There's no room for that. NPR. Now, NPR is my go-to example for how to do structured content right. Dean's going to talk about that in his next section. NPR truncates their headlines in their mobile app. NPR, I trusted you. The Guardian has an entire Tumblr that is dedicated to celebrating the work of the tireless men and women who shorten headlines so they'll fit on your phone. And, I complain about this a lot, and, I sometimes have people be like, I don't know, Karen, I mean, truncating, it's an easy programmatic solution. You can't possibly know how long the text will be. So, it's just a nice, simple way for us to make sure that we've got the right stuff to fit in the right space. What could possibly go wrong? I had to thank Mr. Corey Vilhauer for this one and his sick mind. I appreciate this. It's a great example, right? Because, the problem here is that relying on the fact that we could just, jump in the first 100 characters of something and drop an ellipsis after it, that's not a content strategy. We're better than that. And so rather than taking what, some of the most important information, the headlines, the titles, the call to action, and thinking that the user will be able to figure it out even if they don't have the full information, even if we've just dropped an ellipsis after it, I think that's a horrible fallacy. And it's something that we can't rely on that. So rather than thinking about treating headlines as can't possibly know how long a headline will be, we should be thinking about what alternate forms of headlines could we cut. So Gawker Media, not that long ago, mandated that all headlines have to be fewer than 70 characters. Now, I'm not that draconian. I'm rather than putting a single mandate, what if you just cut two forms of your headlines? Cut a short form and a long form. Slate magazine also recently came up with this strategy. They started cutting a short form of their headlines that they use on mobile and in social media. They saw 100% click-through increases on the shorter forms of the headlines that were designed for consumption in tighter constraints. So there's value to thinking of things like text, just the same way that you'd think about images, and thinking about cutting alternate forms of those things for use in other places. Same thing happens with things like summaries. So Blockbuster, again, the entire point of why you would come to this page is that you should read the description of a movie, decide whether or not you want to watch it, and then if it's something that you want to watch, you go rent it. Except Blockbuster said the same thing. It's we can't possibly know how long a description of a movie is going to be, so instead of actually showing you the whole description, we're going to give you 3 lines. And then if you're intrigued, you can tap or click to see more. Except the problem is sometimes when you tap, you get 4 more words. It's a bad experience, and it's because Blockbuster sort of threw up their hands and said, well, we can't ever possibly know what content we're going to have, so we're going to put the burden on the user to figure out what they want. Blockbuster is bankrupt. You know why? Digital native business Netflix. So a digital native business thinks about this problem in a completely different way. They cut a short form, and they cut a long form of their movie descriptions. And then they use one or the other of those descriptions every single place they need a summary. Netflix is on something like 400 different unique device types. Seriously, you can watch Netflix on your phone, on your tablet, on your computer, on your TV, on your game box. You can watch it on your toaster. And Netflix doesn't ever have to truncate their descriptions. Because they have a short form and a long form, they can go to their designers and say, here's the puzzle pieces that you have to work with. Figure out which one is going to fit the context, is going to fit the available space that you have to work with, and then design around that size, and don't ever truncate. But this goes beyond just thinking about the sizing for different platforms. The university client that I talked about earlier, the SVA, I teach there. So they have an events listing that appears on their homepage, would appear in their mobile app, and now they've got these digital signs that they're putting it up all over campus. So these packages of content need to account for the fact that even though the events listing is the same piece of content, it's going to have different context on different platforms. If they had treated this entire web page as if it was only one big blob of information, they would have no way to pull out the salient details of a short summary of the event, the image from the event, the time and date, the location information, and display that in an appropriate way on the digital signs. So those packages are really thinking about, right, what forms or alternate structures are we going to need to support our content as it has to go on a whole bunch of different platforms? And so the message that I want to leave you with on that point is that you're not creating content for a specific context. I don't want you saying, oh, here's our iPhone headline and here's our short summary for our digital sign. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you think about creating a package of different objects, different text elements, that then you can use in a variety of different places. You're not creating them for any one platform, but rather the goal is to use them on as many different platforms as possible. And so if we're going to be able to do all of this, if we're going to be able to create content in a way that will allow us to have the flexibility and the right metadata and the right structure in it, then we've got to support that with an author experience that allows content creators to actually get to do their jobs. So I get to see a lot of companies' content management underpants, and most of these things look like a database got drunk and vomited all over the screen. It's like fields and forms and check boxes, and sometimes I'll sit down with people and be like, why don't you show me how you update content in your CMS? And they're like, okay, so you gotta type this thing in here, and then you gotta ignore all these other fields because I don't know what they mean, and then scroll down to the bottom, and then you gotta get this code, copy that code, and then scroll way back up to the top. Don't forget to do this. You gotta hit save, and then navigate over to this completely different, unintuitive page over here and paste that code in. It's a mess. It's like, no wonder people hate using these things. And so when I talk about the need for chunks and structured content and semantic metadata, sometimes people will come up to me after my talk and they'll be like, oh, Karen, my content creators, they're never going to go for this. They hate our CMS. They hate the fields. They're begging for something that just works like Microsoft Word. They're just saying, can't you give me a Wysiwyg toolbar or in-place editing? And then I won't have to think about all of this. So here, I want to share a quote from Henry Ford, except he didn't say it, and I don't care. I'm going to tell you anyway. What Henry Ford did not say was that if I'd asked people what they wanted, I would have given them they would have said faster horses. Right now, today, we have content creators that are begging for faster horses, okay? They have a mental model of here's what it means to publish, here's what it means to create content. And they're asking for us to give them a slightly better way of doing what they're already doing. They're not making the mental leap to the fact that instead of building them faster horses, we're building them cars. They're saying, we want something that works the way our familiar print-based model did, not we are helping you be more effective in doing what you need to do in the flexible, dynamic, fluid way that the web works. And here is what I have to say. We all, I believe, have a responsibility to fix this. We all have a responsibility to communicate to content authors how the web is different and why they have to use different tools. And I know it's hard. I mean, believe me, this is my whole job. But if there's one thing that I know, it's that it's possible. And it's because I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen in the field of graphic design, where designers have had to move away from some of the value systems of pixel-perfect control and print layout, and embrace a new way of working, and really have had to embrace a new values system that accounts for how the web works. I have seen it happen. So if graphic designers can do it, content creators can too. But we've got to help them get there. And the way that we're going to help them get there is by treating content management as if it is a user experience problem, which means that when you look at what it takes for somebody to update content, if you had an e-commerce website, I think you would know every single thing there was to know about that workflow. I mean, if you had a website where the goal was that somebody was going to go in there and they were going to fill out forms, and then at the end of their form filling out, they would give you money, you would know everything there was to know about those forms. You would go in and you would try to diagnose and document and figure out where are errors happening? Where are people dropping off? Where are mistakes being made? What's going on in that form where if someone can't figure out how to fill it out, they leave and they don't give us money? Because you would know that figuring out the usability of that process was business value. Well, if you're in the business of creating content, and frankly, we're all in the business of creating content, then the workflow, the usability of the tools that people have are every bit as important to business value as this e-commerce checkout funnel. And I don't know anyone who does usability tests of their content management system. I don't know anybody who has ever gone in and tried to diagnose or do any sort of analytics or research or usability work to figure out where their employees were wasting time fighting with the technology as opposed to creating great content. To me, I'm a UX person through and through, and I want better tools for our users, even if they're internal users, but it's more than that. It's that I believe, as Matt Thompson from NPR here said, beautiful software, even for back-end users, should be an expectation. It shouldn't be seen as a luxury. And we're moving in this direction now because we know that better content management systems foster better content. We can't simply rely on badly designed tools and expect that content authors are going to be able to create the right structure with the right metadata, the right packages in order to support all of these new devices and platforms and screen sizes. So if we're going to survive the zombie apocalypse, it's going to have to start at home. We're going to have to start by creating tools that content authors can use that work just as well as all of the best consumer experiences out there. Like, we deserve it and the web deserves it. Let me leave you with this. The web's not print. The way that people create content, the way that people should think about publishing on the web, should not be reliant solely on the tools and the metaphors and the mental models that we have derived from print publishing. And trust me, I get how hard this is. We have literally 2,000 years or more of human history spent creating documents and hand scribing information. We have 500 years of the printed word. All we have is 25 years of the web. And it's not nearly enough time to wrap our heads around how the web is different and how these tools and these technologies need to change. But we must embrace the fact that the web isn't print and that the way that people create content has to change. Instead, we have to embrace new workflows, new metaphors, new mental models. We have to encourage people to really understand what it means to get content onto a variety of different platforms and screen sizes. We have to get them to embrace the fact that although we're giving up control, we have to give up the control, the illusory control that we thought we had over presentation on the web. We never had it to begin with. And in giving up that control, we get so much in exchange. We get the ability to have true dynamic publishing. We have the ability to tailor messages across platforms, across devices, across regions, across the world. We get so much more from the web. And our ability to take advantage of it is rooted in the fact that the way that people create content must change. But we have to do it. Our future depends on fighting off these zombies. They're not going to stop. The platforms, the devices, the screen sizes, the bandwidth, the input mechanisms, the new devices, they're never going to stop. Humanity will always have an impulse to have the latest device, some new technology, some new way to communicate, some new way to engage on the web. And so our ability to embrace that, to look it squarely in the eye and say, yes, zombies, we are going to defeat you. We're going to defeat you by driving a stake into the heart of what content management and publishing on the web truly means. And I think it's our mission, it's our responsibility to provide a great experience to all of our users out there, whatever platform or device or screen size or resolution or bandwidth they choose to go online. I'm excited to do it, and I hope that you guys are too. Thank you.